5.41 1.
I was doing a tour of Asia where I was giving a presentation about database programs. I assumed the audiences would understand English. The organisers knew that I couldn't speak Chinese, and I knew they would be familiar with the technical language of the products I was going to talk about, which were DBase and Clipper. Well, for most of the tour, the talks seemed to go extremely well. There were big audiences and the venues were great. Questions I was asked by the audience at the end of the talks showed that everyone had really understood what I was saying. When we arrived in the penultimate city, whose name I'm not going to mention, I started my session as I usually did with a few questions to get to know something about the audience. So, first I asked them, how many of you use DBase? I raised my own hand, of course, because I use it myself, and pretty much the whole audience raised their hands. So then I asked, how many of you here use Clipper? And once again, nearly 100% of the audience raised their hands. This was extremely unusual. In fact, almost impossible. With a sinking feeling, I then asked them, how many of you want to be an astronaut? And I watched as everyone's hands went up. I might as well have been speaking to a group of aliens. As it turned out, most of the audience spoke Chinese and only Chinese. But I could see that 2 or 3 people in the audience spoke English, because they were practically rolling on the floor laughing.
2.
I was giving a talk in Hungary to a group of about 200 English teachers. I got to the place where I was giving the talk a bit late, only about 10 minutes before I was supposed to start. I rushed to the room and saw that everything was set up and most of the audience were already waiting, and I told the organisers that I just needed to quickly go to the toilet and then I would start. They pointed me in the right direction, but when I got to the toilets, I saw that there were 2 doors with words on them in Hungarian, but no signs. I looked at the words and decided that one of them must be the men's toilet, and I went in, and went into a cubicle. Suddenly I heard voices of other people coming in, but to my horror they were women's voices, and I realised that I had guessed wrongly and had gone into the women's toilets. I guessed that these women must be teachers coming to my talk, so there was no way I could open the door and come out. I waited and waited, getting more and more stressed by the minute and worrying about being late to start my talk. After about 5 minutes or so, everything went quiet, and I was able to rush out and go back to the room where the audience was waiting for me to start, as it was already 5 minutes past the start time. Thank goodness nobody saw me.
3.
My first ever presentation was at a conference for English teachers in Spain in about 1988. I wanted to show the audience some good ideas for using video in the classroom. I explained one of the ideas, and then I went to turn on the video player and nothing happened. And then again, nothing, and again. By this time, I was so stressed and annoyed that in the end I said, OK, if it doesn't work this time, I'm leaving. And I really meant it. Amazingly, almost as if it had heard me, it worked. I never forgot that talk, and it taught me to never rely 100% on technology in a presentation.
4.
Some years ago, I had to do a presentation to a group of construction workers about health and safety at work. When I was getting dressed that morning, I put on a silk skirt, and as I was doing it up, the button at the waist broke. I didn't bother to change because the skirt had a zip, and anyway, I was in a hurry. During the presentation, as I walked backwards and forwards across the stage, I started to feel something silky hit the back of my ankles. My skirt was falling down. The audience was absolutely entranced, and not by what I was saying. I quickly pulled it up and said, "Now that I have your attention." The audience roared with laughter, and one of them shouted out, "I thought that was part of your presentation." I felt terribly embarrassed, and I could hear my mother's voice in my ear saying, "You should always wear nice underwear in case you're ever in an accident." I managed to finish my presentation, and I rushed outside and started to shake. That audience may never remember a thing I said, but I'm sure they won't forget me.